Hi, and welcome to the April Supper Club. This is the sixth episode in a 6-month series on interreligious dialogue with our interfaith neighbors. And I think we've had a wonderful series with our guests. I do want to start, though, by saying that this is the last supper, the Last Supper Club video for you and you and me. It's been a long time. And
9 years.
9 years for us, but probably 15 or 16
Probably 15
years.
or 16 years, yeah. I think there's a couple of clubs that are still going that started back when we first started this. The first year was really for young adults. We're trying to get them connected. Kind of did a pilot test run for a year, and then we opened it up, and it's been a really, great way to connect people.
Yeah, it was great. This was Ian's brainchild, and it really brings a large congregation opportunities to meet in smaller groups.
Yeah,
so thank you.
It's been great.
Yeah,
it's been fun.
All right. Well, this series I think has been very fun and very interesting. We chose this theme, interreligious dialogue with our interfaith neighbors, because of this time in history. I think we think very polarized conversations that are not happening around people of difference. And so we thought this would be a great time, especially around religion, where there's so many misconceptions and misunderstandings about each other, that we would hear from individuals who could talk about their own religion instead of us teaching about religion.
That's right.
That's great.
So we started with Buddhism. Diana Thompson.
Reverend Diana Thompson.
From a strain or strand of Buddhism called Pure Land Buddhism, part of the Mahayana tradition, I think, in terms of the big circles. I don't know a lot about all of that, but that was great. Then after that, our friend Adam Morris, Rabbi Adam Morris from Temple Micah, representing Judaism. And then third would have been
Dr. Nursin Konuk. From the Mosaic Foundation, and she taught us about Islam.
Yeah, it was great to have a woman talking about Islam, with some of our stereotypes about that. I thought that was really refreshing. And then finally, Deeptang Shu Das, a doctoral student at DU, talking about Hinduism, which is fascinating too.
So both being a scholar of Hinduism and being raised.
Growing up in the Assam region of India.
Right.
Yeah.
It was really good.
Yeah.
Do you want to cover some of the highlights of the different religious traditions?
A lot of things stood out for me. I hope this was great for you all. I just kept going, so maybe starting with Buddhism, some of the things that Diana was telling us, I was fascinated with the idea that, she was, in fact, I didn't know this, but that traditionally, meditation was for monks and nuns. It's a very specialized field. You had to be, a bit further along the journey before that would happen. And it really wasn't until, the 20th century and kind of the westernized application of it. It's fascinating. Or even when we talked about being enlightened, she said, well, most lay people, that's not the goal, is to be enlightened. Again, that's this kind of next level kind of thing. And when we asked about the goal, she said it's just to see life clearly. I don't know quite how she said it, but I thought that's beautiful.
As it is. See life as it is.
Very kind of practical, or there was not a lot of metaphysics to it. If in other words, not a lot of talk about a next life or even a deity in the way we think about it. That's it was fascinating.
I think it was stripping of ideas that we think about Buddhism, or the caricaturization of it, perhaps. I thought that was really interesting. And then Judaism with Rabbi Morris, his movement, the temple that he serves, Temple Micah here, who is now housed in Montview Church, but they're part of the Reformed movement, so that's a particular kind of stream in Judaism, and he had some really interesting things to say about what makes Judaism unique in the way that they mark time.
I love that part.
We talked about that,
Well, you asked him what his basics are, and his first thing out of his mouth was time. And I thought, none of the others talked about that in that same way. That it's how we are in relationship to the time of day, to the time of year.
The week, that they mark their week by Shabbat.
That was cool.
Shabbat, yeah.
And story was the other, which made a little more sense. You know, I kind of expected.
People of the book.
People of the book, people of the story. And when he talked, you asked him about the goal of that faith was this movement from slavery to liberation, right? Or freedom, he said, slavery to freedom. And of course, that whole story of that people, like of the Exodus story, it's not just abstractly, like when Deep Tangshu talked about Hinduism, you know, we asked him and he said the goal is liberation. But he's talking about, you know, liberations from cycles of rebirth and kind of this cosmic level that's at a, not as concrete as Adam was talking about Judaism, right? Of just there's a story of a people who are literally moving from slavery to liberation, and then they take it to different layers. Yeah, it's fascinating.
And Passover, as a marking of time, they will retell that story, you know, of the people being set free from Egypt, and they live it and they eat the foods of it and they enact the story, which is really cool.
It really struck me how whatever you're, you know, usually we're born into the faith tradition that we may change somewhere along the way, but how differently your worldview gets shaped by, you know, if you grew up as a Hindu in India with all of that Deep was talking about, versus Adam growing up in a Jewish home and with these stories and these rituals, and it shapes your worldview. And you know, and of course we as Christians are also being shaped in specific ways that are almost hard to see. Yeah, I think we're almost, I don't know, I feel a little like, what? It's harder to see my own. It's easier to see how theirs are being shaped by, you know, the colorfulness of Hinduism versus the starkness of the Buddhist tradition, or, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, it is interesting to see our own religion when you're hearing someone else talk about theirs. It is so. It gives you that opportunity to step back and go, oh, how are we
what's important
perceived?
to me?
What is important to me, and what is this really about that we're doing, right?
In fact, why don't we talk a little? I'd be curious.
Well, do we want to say anything about Islam?
Sure.
The last,
sure.
And that's one more. Yep.
Okay.
And so our representative Nursin Konuk talked about Islam, and I thought what struck me about Islam is that she talked about similar articles of faith in the different streams of Islam. And let me just add, I thought it was interesting that almost to a person they said, I'm not speaking for my whole religion. I'm speaking from my part of it, or the way I've been raised in this, and I'm not speaking for this is done differently. So I appreciate it very much that I want to respect that. But you asked, for Nursin, you asked, what about women in Islam? And what struck me about her answer is that Islam is much more liberating for women than I think we have this perception, and Islam takes on, not surprisingly, the cultural influences of where it's being practiced. So Islam being practiced here in the United States is much more liberating for women, Muslim women, than it would be if they're in Saudi Arabia. And so the cultural influences on all of our religions.
For sure, the cultural overlay, even Christians in other part of the world are having a very different experience because of that.
Christians in our southern states might be having a very different experience.
Other churches in Denver would have, I mean, really, it's so diverse. I mean, it's remarkable, What I loved, one of the many things I loved about what she said, she was talking about Islam meaning peace, right? And then she said, because this is our faith, and our faith is at its core about peace, you have an obligation to make people feel safe when they're around you.
I just
went, oh my gosh,
that was such a great word.
Yeah, to make people feel safe around you. I loved it. Beautiful.
Yeah. And we talk about that. We use that word, safe, helping people have safe spaces to be in. Let's say that that's your identity.
Yeah, I really loved it. There were a lot of things. I was struck with Islam that, you know, we share, from their perspective, we share the same prophets. They represent, they see Jesus as one of their prophets. The text, they see the Gospels as one of their sacred texts. She used language like repentance and stewardship, a lot of the same language. And yet I feel more and I personally feel like I know the least about Islam in some ways, or it's feels very different, and partly because I have more interest in Buddhism and Hinduism a little more, but it's really quite similar in those shared,
in those ways.
yeah, more than I thought. So.
Yeah. One of the things that surprised me about Islam, and I would like to learn more about, was her mention of one of the articles of faith as the belief in the afterlife.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, that's interesting, but I don't know a lot about that. And we didn't have time, of course, to go into it. But we have afterlife baggage in Christianity.
Right. How do they deal, especially on the liberal versus conservative ends of that, of how we think about, how concretely we think of that. Right. Well, and along with that, one of the 6 articles of faith, or I think was what she called them, were belief in angels.
Yeah.
And I thought it's so interesting how we don't talk about angels at all in the liberal church.
Right. Roman Catholics talk about angels.
Yeah, and it's certainly
saints.
biblical. I mean, it's all over the Bible, and yet we don't know quite what to do with them. And I thought, oh, well, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I learned so much from so many of these folks.
Yeah, definitely.
And that was just in 15 minutes, right? It was nothing
I know.
compared to what you could really dive into. So
like there's just such a taste that we've received that it does make me want to dive in, like have a weeks on Hinduism, have some weeks on.
Did you have one that you were more drawn to, or felt like, oh, I'd love to learn? I personally I'm curious about that one more after having heard from them.
Yeah. Oh gosh. All of them. I guess the Islam. I guess
right?
Because I think it just shook up some ideas about it. Maybe because we were hearing from a woman, in her hijab, who is talking about a religion that she sees as very liberating. It's not oppressive, And so I just think, oh, that'd be really interesting. It'd be interesting for me to have more relationships with Muslim women and be open to learning and ask more questions. And but that would mean me putting myself in spaces to be in relationship with people who are different.
I think I have the most stereotypes about Islam, just kind of embedded, I think I know what this is, and it's oppressive in different ways. So I think for me it was Hinduism, which surprised me, and I got to take Deep home because we drove. He's a student at DU, which is near where I lived, and we got into a fascinating conversation. I loved I love the kind of primordial, cosmic, universal language that Hinduism uses, and I've always thought it was just so crazy with all the different deities and all of that stuff. But really, I think underneath is this underlying principle of that cosmic. Oneness that connects with the Atman, the soul. So when I really started,
always trying to,
which I just feel drawn to that personally. I mean, I think there's lots of ways that Christianity actually is talking about that, the soul, the spark of God that Eckhart, Meister Eckhart would have said that we have in us that connects with the, it's similar in some ways. And I didn't expect that because I've always looked at Hinduism and just gone, I'm overwhelmed. I don't know what, it's too much. But
I loved his own interest in the feminine energy, Shakti, and that the goddess Shakti, and I thought, oh, this is good. I would really like to learn more about that.
Yeah, and that being the oldest faith tradition, the oldest texts, and from that very original time is this feminine principle of the divine, which is great.
And Judaism, I think we talked a little bit about that. Judaism has a similar feminine energy called the Shekinah, and it's the feminine power and energy in the cosmology, I guess, of Judaism. And so I thought that was an interesting connection. Anyway.
Yeah. And is that, in what ways is that similar to Sophia in our tradition and the wisdom and is representing the Holy Spirit itself being represented as feminine energy?
Absolutely,
so it's there.
I think it
and
is
it's
all
really
there.
not,
And I think that's a really important piece of learning about other religions is that it does challenge us to uncover what is in our own. It's not as if these elements aren't, or dynamics aren't in our own religious traditions, but some things get lifted up and other things don't. So maybe it's a recovering.
Especially in our church, we were talking earlier about, what we experience as Christianity, and from a 21st century Western capitalist kind of perspective is very different than other parts of the world at this time.
Totally.
Or a
Enlightenment.
pre-Enlightenment or pre-Roman Empire. The early Christians, what they understood Christianity to be, had to be totally different in so many ways. The overlays.
The empire, right?
Yeah, right. So when we say Christianity or Hinduism or Islam or any of these, it's, as Deep said, Hinduisms. There's just endless, depending on your experience and your situation in life. So all good stuff.
Yeah. Well, what might we encourage these folks to think about on their last dinner? Yeah.
Well, the question I think is the same one we've been asking: is what are you learning? Having heard us share, what stuck out for us, what stuck out for you, just having that good, rich conversation about it. This is our last one for the season. It's my last one, but it's also the last one for this season.
Yeah.
So we always just remind you that some clubs have been together for years, and that's really lovely in its way, because you get to kind of experience life together and all the good and the bad and the hard. But it's also part of the beauty of supper clubs is that you can also kind of mix and match and try a new club, and it's really okay to break up with your supper club and try a different one next week.
Register for something else next year.
Yeah, so we encourage that, and don't take it, but have that conversation. Don't just slip out the back door. Have a conversation together, talk to your captain, and
see what you want to do. Thanks so much.
Yeah, it's been great.
It has been. It's been good fun.
Yeah. Oh, and if you have any feedback for us about this series, we really do appreciate that. You can tell your captain that.
Yeah.
What
worked, what didn't work,
Yeah, I feel like we're in a bit of a vacuum sometimes doing these, and it's just good to kind of go, is this working? Is this, or if you have a suggestion for a theme or something.
If you have topics for next year,
Yep.
I'm open.
That's right. Don't talk to me.
All right.
All right.
Blessings.
See
Have
ya.
a nice night.
Bye-bye.